Hello, everybody. Today is April 8th, and this is the regular weekly meeting for the Gateway API. Please remind that this is regulated by the CNCF Code of Conduct, which basically boils down to being nice with each other. So, yeah, and I see we have a few people here in this meeting. I don't know if there is some newcomer, if someone is new in this kind of meeting in this community and want to introduce themselves, please go on. Otherwise, it's not a problem at all, and we can get started with the usual agenda. Anyone? All right. Um, As always, if you want to write down your name in the attendees section of the agenda, you are welcome to do so. And we can get started with the first item from Rob, I guess, which is basically the RC2 that we are going to release this week.
Yeah, I mean, this just requires coordination between a couple of us maintainers. I think we've got enough signal now that it's good. KubeCon just distracted us. So at this point, I think it's more just a question of when we can find time to get RC2 out, and then generally the final release would follow RC2 within a matter of single-digit days, hopefully, 3-ish. We'll see when it falls, but hopefully we can get this wrapped up pretty soon. And I'm assuming, we've seen some good feedback on RC2 for RC1 by at least 3 implementations now. So we're calling that good enough. There was at least one fix that made it in, which was that there was a regression in one of our conformance tests around, was it some form? Anyway, there was a threshold that was tightened more than it should have been.
Percentage mirror, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, percentage mirroring. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And then for 1.4, I thought it would be good to just throw out some ideas of, hopefully, sometime this week or next week, we'll actually get the discussions out there for submitting your ideas more formally for 1.4. But I wanted to have an idea of what might be coming or what people are thinking about, so we can kind of prepare for it. But with that said, the ones I'm aware of, I think some others have added since I started this list, but backend TLS, I know people have been working on that, especially Candace, to get that across the line. Hopefully this is the release we can do that. That just narrowly missed this past release. Gateway client cert validation, we had some good discussion about this at KubeCon. We may need to adjust its location, but I think the actual configuration seems fine. And then supported features updates. We really need to get this across the line into GA, but there are some other updates alongside that could be useful, like including a feature name in every docs page, for example. And so that people.
The other one I'm suggesting is that we start requiring a feature name at least for anything to move to experimental.
Yep.
So
yes. Yep.
Yeah. Good to see you too, Guy.
Yeah.
Nick, what are you? Where are you that the sun is still up and it's 8 a.m. Pacific?
I am currently in Zurich.
Oh, lovely. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, for this week only.
All right. Well, on that note, external auth, this is I think one of the biggest ones for this next release. Seems like there's a lot of interest in it. So yeah, we'll be good to get this one through. The thing we talked about at KubeCon, I don't know if it's something that anyone is signing up to drive or volunteer for, but I thought it was an interesting topic. But I think Flynn started this discussion around how we can enable MTLS for gateways that can't have a sidecar injected into them because they may not be inside the same cluster or inside the same mesh.
Maybe another way to describe it is how can we tell gateways how to participate in the mesh?
Sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it could
It's-
be the config that I think we need here is potentially useful for more things. But yes, I think the primary use
Potentially.
case that's getting us here is mesh.
Didn't we
It-
realize that we already have something for this? So like backend TLS on Gateway?
Yeah, the existing backend TLS config on Gateway is basically does a similar, well, could basically do a similar thing. We would just need to define. I think we need to move that backend TLS config around as part of the backend TLS updates anyway, and so that we may just be able to have a solution to this particular problem fall out as part of the backend work with some like docs updates.
Yeah,
I think
that
that-
sounds reasonable.
I think that May is doing a certain amount of heavy lifting in that sentence. I've found it ironic that I had some detailed notes around the auth discussion, but it looks like I may not have detailed notes around that backend TLS business or that, TLS from outside the cluster thing. But I'm going to continue checking that to make sure that I really didn't have notes on that to write some things down. But
I'm going to just make a note to go back in my memory and write down what I remember as well.
yeah, so Nick, you and I can, that sounds like a great starting point. And between the two of us,
Yeah.
we'll probably come up with something useful. As I recall, one of the questions was about key distribution, very broadly speaking. And another
Yep.
of the questions had to do with how do you tell the gateway that it is required to do certain things as participating in the mesh and stuff like that. But we do need to go write those things down. And it's so I shall say this without having looked at the timing about 1.4, but I think it would be a lovely thing for 1.4. And
Like I said, I think
yeah,
that
I shall
what I was trying to
tentatively
say.
put my name down on that one.
What I was trying to say was that I think there's a lot of overlap with the backend, with the global TLS config changes that we need to do for client cert validation, and some of the stuff that people want to do about backend TLS defaulting. So like we may be able to hit all three of those with like a relatively small set of changes.
I can certainly
so
help
that's-
review some of that stuff too. Because
Yeah.
we have exactly the similar needs of wanting to be able to integrate out of cluster ingresses with mesh.
It's not exactly uncommon.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so the next one was the default gateways thing.
gateways, yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is one that is very everything else in that list I think has been discussed in significantly more detail than default gateways. Default gateways is really my way at trying to describe the overall problem that is in that UX thread of can we make gateway a bit easier to use if all you want to do is configure HTTP routes. And maybe that's defining a pattern of implementations can create default gateways. Yeah, I'm not sure yet, but this is far more ambiguous than everything else in here. But just wanted to at least mention it.
I'm
It
also
feels to me like
I'm also considering putting my name tentatively on that one. I realize that Nick might end up being upset if I have my name on multiple things that he and I have strong opinions on, but
it's
that's
more
a joke.
like, I mean,
It's a joke.
yeah, good. Because yeah, like the main thing I'm concerned with is that we actually get PRs in. So I don't mind arguing on a PR or on a doc, but like the main thing I want is that if we're going to put these in scope, like I want to see a PR. To be honest, for that one, I would actually be super happy if we only had a provision, even if we only had a provisional PR, a provisional GEP that like laid out the terms of the problem. in the 1.4 cycle because it feels like it could be contentious.
Yeah. I mean, we have been discussing this problem for like the last 7-8 months. So even reaching an agreement, I think it's a success now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And then there
rate
is
limiting. Rate limiting is
yeah.
completely non-contentious, I think, right? Like,
Yeah,
There's
the
no
details
problem
might
with
be,
rate
but I know
limits.
I know rate limiting has been a long requested feature, and I know it. I mean, last I saw it was one of the top requested features from Ingress Nginx. So that combination probably will push it over the top.
it needs to be clear. Anyone watching this recording, it needs to start with a provisional GEP that defines what rate limiting is, the various types of rate limiting, blah 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 blah. Like that one cannot start without setting the terms of the discussion.
Yeah.
And CRD deployment job, which is something that we
Yeah, it
have
looks
been
like
discussing a lot. Yes.
Yeah, it looks like the last
added
two of
that.
these are not really features so much as they are just things that we need to make the release work better.
The CRD, so to be clear for folks who weren't at KubeCon, the CRD deployment job is a proposed solution for some of the problems about how do we install the CRDs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically this is what you were talking about, probably, right? Which is not a real thing new for the So
Yes, we did start about talking that talking like, can we install these by default? And we got pretty strong feedback in the maintainer summit that no was the answer there. Can we install these by default? Because there's a lot of stuff. It's not no, but it's actually the better way to say this is the feedback we got was you can do it, but here's like a year's worth of engineering work that you'll need to do to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, and I think
I think a year might be low.
Yeah.
I think even that was, okay. What was my biggest frustration with that process was the idea that if we did it, we would need to have our CRDs have a one-to-one versioning matchup with Kubernetes minor releases, which could never change. You could never install a newer version, which that feels like a non-starter for me.
Yeah, it was that we lose a significant advantage of being out of tree.
Yeah. It was, I think it was, there were at least 4 of us there, right? Rob, Nick, Mike, and me, we were all there. And it was a much more contentious topic than I had ever been expecting it to be. The ones that I remember the most were, was it Antonio who was saying that
testing.
Well, if you wanted to go and do this, then the gateway API stuff would need to be tested to the same degree that the stuff in tree is tested anyway, which was interesting and tricky to argue with. And Tim asking, well, would we allow people to just go and slap a new definition of pod onto their cluster while it was running to upgrade it, which was an interesting bit of a straw man, but kind of interesting to think about in ways too.
It kind of illustrated a lot of the problems with the install by default / bundle it with Kubernetes / have it have the same API versions and stuff.
The other thing was wanting a reference implementation to be able to carry out that more thorough testing.
Yes. Yeah, and our argument or my argument that, hey, listen, we haven't had any of these requirements for ingress or network policy, and they're installed by default. The response was pretty clearly that those are awful examples that we don't want to repeat. So
that was a mistake. Was the answer?
Which was also fascinating to hear, by the way. I was not terribly thrilled by the idea of a deployment job, Nick, but the maintainer summit discussion kind of changed my mind a little bit on that.
Yeah, it's like the best we can do. And the thing I like about the deployment job option, just for background, I've told most people who are at KubeCon about this, is that it does make the lifetime of the CRDs at least coterminous with like installing and implementation, right? Like, so it means that you can install, it'll give you a way to be able to make sure your implementation is installed and to be able to ensure that your implementation can rely on the fact that the CRDs are present in the cluster in at least the version you want. It does run the risk of exacerbating the dead fields problem, where you have fields set that your implementation cannot actuate and does not know about, and so can't tell users that it doesn't know about because it doesn't know about them. But I have a couple of longer range plans there that I'm hoping to talk to API machinery about, to hopefully that might help us address that. But that's like a year or two away, so I'll get that process kicked off, but it's not going to be useful for a while.
I'm really tempted to put in here, this raises some dead field issues, but Nick assures us he's got all that solved.
Why must you hurt me so?
Cool. Well, it looks like
All right.
we will have, I'm not saying all of the things in there will get in, and I'm not saying that's a complete list, but it seems like we've got a lot of ideas for the next release of Gateway API anyways.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is awesome. What I would say, I added this thing about release cycle changes down below, and one of the bits of feedback I had gotten earlier is it would be real nice if we could just give the dates for everything up front. What we've been doing the past 2 releases is we would give the release for the end of the next phase, and then when we got to the end of the next phase, give the date for the end of the next one, and so on all the way down the list. Which is not as predictable. It's flexible, but it's not as predictable as I think we'd like to be. So we've also gotten some feedback around the length of these phases, and some that are either too long or too short. I thought it'd be good to kind of, if we are going to try and set dates for everything up front, it would be good to have an idea of which of these timelines is too long to start with or too short to start with.
So I think the thing I want to call out about setting dates up front, though, is that the downside of that for everybody is that setting the dates up front means we are committing to those dates. That means that we are committing that we will not move those dates without a very good reason. My feature did not make it in is not a good reason. If we're going to commit the dates up front, then it's going to be on everybody to do their reviews early so that we can make sure that features meet those dates, because that did not happen for the last 2 releases.
Yeah.
Probably setting the dates ahead of time is a step towards making it more likely that people take them seriously, in my opinion.
100%. But I just want to be 100% also clear that, that it's.
I think we should actually, probably should write in this document, my feature didn't make this is not a good reason to move the date, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. And I think part of what, setting the dates up front would do is the past couple releases, we've extended every date by basically a week, which has made them looser than intended, and, lengthened our release
We missed being able to
process.
have a release, and we missed being able to have a release for KubeCon, for example. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that for example, scoping feels like something that the perceived timeline is longer than it needs to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? Like, I feel like we could cut that to, say, 3 weeks to get ideas in and vote on them and move on. That's just throwing a date, a rough idea, but
it seems
any
reasonable
opinion
to me.
on 3 weeks being too long or too short?
I think it's definitely not too short.
Yep.
Cool. Do we want shorter? I mean, I think
we should start with 3 weeks, and I think the key part here is that we need to leave the most time for iteration and review, and refinement.
Yeah.
Iteration and review is the hardest part. And so,
I will say I am nervous because the longer we make it, it does seem like even in the last cycle, what happens is the first 2 to 3 weeks, there's no action. And then there's a flurry of activity in the last. So like, even if we made it longer, I think the same pattern would apply. You get all the
Yes.
activity backloaded towards the later 2 or 3
Yep.
weeks.
I mean, it could be that we need to keep those two phases and just be clearer that gap iteration and review means gap iteration and review. And if your gap iteration and review is not done by the end of that date, that you ain't doing API refinement and documentation, right? Like, that is when your thing falls out of scope. Get your
Or you
reviews
put something in
early.
there as, gap iteration and review is 8 weeks, but either we see every couple of weeks that something is going on with your gap, or it's being approved, or it gets dropped, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
that's
I say this.
fair.
I say that
like,
as somebody who's absolutely guilty of leaving gap stuff to the last week. So
yeah,
Yeah.
that's actually a good idea. Having some checkpoints in between where we require. So, for
Activity, yep.
example,
Yeah.
we need a PR for everything 2 weeks in. We need a draft gap ready 2
Yep.
weeks in.
And if you want to do multiple PRs, that's fine too, right? Like if you want to do a provisional PR first, and then to get the, if you're doing the provisional PR to set the terms, you can do that like immediately, get that in, and then if you have time, then maybe you can look at moving it towards implementable in the same release, right? Like, but that's only if you have time. Like,
so let's think about checkpoints while we're all here. I threw out 2 weeks in, you need to have at least draft PR. It seems like the other milestone we would want is PR that's fully ready for review. Like, from the perspective of the author, this PR is complete.
I would put that at 4 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
4?
I'm kind of assuming that we're gonna.
No. So, yeah, I agree with that. So, Mattia, what we're saying is 2 weeks is still draft PR.
Oh no, sorry.
And then there's
2 weeks for the draft PR, 4 weeks
Okay.
for this should be fully reviewable, and
not
that
is
gives
this
you-
is finished. It's not like it's ready for at least an initial review. Like,
Okay.
and
Yeah,
if your
like,
thing does not have a
PR
PR that's ready for initial review by 4 weeks, then you're not going to get it done in time. There's no way it's going to happen. That is us being realistic about how long it takes to review gaps.
Right. Because the problem that we ran into in the previous ones wasn't that people were trying not to write the PRs and get them reviewed. It was that they were writing them and not having them ready for review until week 6 of a 7-week period, which is not enough time for the reviewers to do a good job and not enough time to correct anything if it goes wrong. So
yes.
Yeah.
And look at I'm not trying to be the guy who doesn't live in a glass house here. Like, I'm as guilty of this as anybody, just to be clear.
Something that I'm not proposing that, but I would like to raise this point. Maybe assigning reviewers who should have commitment on gaps could be beneficial, because I don't know. I mean, today the only person who has commitment on a gap is the owner of the gap, but I think that giving responsibility on the reviewers as well for that specific gaps could help could make the process a little bit smoother and quicker. Because otherwise it's just a best effort, and sorry folks, I didn't have time and I couldn't review it.
So Mattia is proposing public shaming of reviewers who don't review.
Exactly, you got me.
So maybe that's part of scoping.
Yeah, that should be
I
part
really
of
like that
scoping.
idea.
Yeah.
It's not that dissimilar to like what I did the past cycle with retry budgets, where I really wasn't doing much of the work of like writing the gap, but I was trying to help like shepherd it along and like make sure that it was like moving.
That would be great. So basically, part of scoping, we already require that the person that proposes a gap is the person that is committing to do the primary work on it. I think as part of that, we need to have at least one reviewer sign up to be a primary reviewer for a GEP to get into scope.
Yep. This is like the CNCF used to have the talk sponsor for the level moves. You need to get someone to agree to be your reviewer.
When should we decide such a gap reviewer? During the scoping
As part of
phase?
as part of the scoping, yep, definitely.
Yeah, I added it above.
So for the
Oh.
GEP to be considered as part of scoping, it needs to have an owner, and preferably, and like you can put it up as part of scoping, but it can't be accepted as for scoping until it also has a reviewer, no matter what the votes say. So if you are the one who's putting your GEP forward, you need to organize somebody who is already a GEP reviewer to review your GEP. Right? Like you can't be like, oh, I'm going to have this other person become a GEP reviewer and review my GEP. It needs to be somebody who is already in the GEP reviewers group.
Yep. Makes sense. Okay. And then the last phase of the release cycle, refinement and documentation. I feel like that's been less, it's already.
Sorry, Rob. So we are keeping GEP iteration review to 8 weeks, right?
Well, 8 weeks feels long to me, but
I feel like 7 weeks is good there, because if we have extra time from scoping, we want to give it to like the latter stages.
Okay.
To me.
Yep.
Do we agree? Okay.
Like,
yeah, I'm fine with that.
That means that
I would say
we've basically borrowed 2 weeks from the scoping and given it to the GEP review.
Yeah. And then for the final stage here of, well, not final, but refinement and documentation, I hope that because we have more well-documented and checkpoints for GEP iteration, that we won't be shoving as much into API refinement phase. And so maybe hitting on the tail end, on the shorter end of that, of 3 weeks, it would be okay. Like, if we're doing things well, this should be a formality.
Agreed. But I mean, API refinement also includes stuff like, getting the ghost structs into the thing and making sure we update the tooling to make sure that everything generates properly, which was all things that had to happen within like a week.
Yes.
Here, sort of like in the last release at an emergency level. Oh, it turns out our ex listener set generation doesn't work properly. We better fix that.
That was awful, but I don't think it was, we tied it to listener set, but it wasn't really tied to any individual feature. It was more just our own API machinery. Okay. So I think the rest feels solid to me. We can't completely, actually now we've gotten to a point where we can even roughly control the timeline of this final phase, because we've got an agreement from SIGNet leads that we can provide informational review only, and we don't need to wait for them. We don't need to block on their.
It's not a blocking review. Yep.
So given that, I would say 3 weeks seems in the right ballpark.
Yep.
So in that case, we have what, 9 weeks plus 7 weeks?
16 weeks.
16 weeks. Okay, so we're at a 4-month release cycle if we can actually make this happen. Knock on wood. Okay.
I mean, I think it's important that for at least, I think that if we do a 4-month release cycle, we actually need to be deliberate about it, so that ideally the scoping phase will fall just like over or just after KubeCon, because practically it's almost always going to be the case that we will come up with ideas while we're at KubeCon.
Yeah. This worked out pretty well, because a lot of the ideas we've come up with have come out of KubeCon.
Something that I would like to bring up now is that this process makes a lot of sense to me, but it can be only applicable to the new experimental features because, for example, I don't know if you can think of the backend TLS policy, right? This is a completely detached process because the main blockers for the backend TLS policies are the conformance tests, for example, so, right? Which are pretty complex in this case. So how does
Yeah,
that
no, I
fit
think
in this schedule?
I think you're right. We ran into that with backend TLS policy this time. We didn't have a clear deadline on when, because the only thing we said is you need to have 3 conformant implementations for us to graduate a thing. And that could theoretically mean you get, conformance tests in day -1, and then every implementation automatically passes, and then you graduate on day,
So we need
day 0.
Practically, we need like that same set of requirements that we just had for new gaps. Like you need to have a PR open at 2 weeks and blah blah blah. We need a similar set of checkpoints throughout the overall process about where your transition to standard gap needs to be at, right? Like, is it the same? Like, do you need to have a draft gap PR that outlines the changes that you need to make to move things to standard? Like it gives you a burn down list for what you need to work on, or something. I don't know. Like it feels to me like at the very least, maybe we should be considering saying, hey, for your gap to move to standard, the first thing you need to do is in the gap refinement phase, add a to-do list to the gap and burn it down, right? Like, and then you need to have finished your burn down by this week of the API refinement phase or something like that. Like if it's add seven conformance tests, ensure that 3 implementations are conformant with those things, then that's the thing. But something like that feels right.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's good. Yeah, so basically, step 1 is write your conformance test plan of these are the conformance tests we need to graduate this by GA to GA, and then get everyone to agree on, yes, if you have all these conformance tests, that's good, this graduates. And then actually write the conformance tests and then actually get N implementations to pass them. Those feel like the checkpoints, and they are somewhat distinct from the other parallel universe.
And I also would argue that the person assigned to the gap is not necessarily the one who is in charge of writing all the conformance tests, because I mean,
100%.
That can be done by different people. I mean, it's also a good thing to have multiple people involved, right?
Yeah, for sure. But the person who is in charge of the gap is the person who's responsible for shepherding those changes to make sure that the conformance tests are ready by the date, right? Like,
yeah, I agree. Okay.
So that feels like the thing we need to do there is a PR to that release cycle documentation to make all of those changes.
Yeah.
Rob, I'm looking at you. You can't tell.
Yeah, no, this is my thing. I don't mind taking this one. I've got some ideas. I feel like we need a mermaid diagram kind of thing showing the way the process kind of forks at some point between experimental and standard, and then eventually comes back together.
And the decision things at each phase and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think Shane has put his hand up to be the release manager for this release, so that will mean that he gets to be the first one who runs through this and and find what we've missed and update things as we go.
Yeah, I don't know that we actually, maybe we discussed that at some point, but the idea is part of this, we should probably write that down in this release cycle changes thing, is having a formal release manager instead of just relying on, I don't know, whoever's around. Yeah, me. Sure.
Which basically has always been Rob.
Yeah. But yeah, actually,
First requirement for Gateway API Release Manager: you must be named Rob.
Yes. Cool. Okay. The other thing I wanted to cover, Nick, you responded to, like, I think you and I both had good discussions with Mail at KubeCon about cert manager and HTTP routes. and I thought it would be useful to bring this to this discussion to a few more people here and make sure
it's
that
probably worth me just taking a moment to explain what I
Yeah.
put in that, to just say out loud what I put in that issue. Yeah, Mattia, if you are typing, then feel free to continue. But when you're done,
Yeah, sorry.
if you could click on the thanks. So this use case is basically this Beyond Evil OP here has opened a thing for Cert Manager to say, hey, could you please make it so that application developers can add HTTP routes and have Cert Manager provision certs for those HTTP routes. It's basically working around, because this person wants to work around the fact that that currently adding certs to gateway objects requires editing gateway objects. So if you want to add another host name to a gateway object, you've got to add a new listener, because you need a new space to put the TLS certificates and a new host name. So this has been a very common ask for like years, 3-4 years probably. But we wanted to hit the sort of the more common use case, which is that, what we felt was the more common use case, which is that platform owners want to be able to control the distribution and use of certificates. And so that's why Gateway is designed the way it is. I put a big explanation in the bottom comment, Mattia, about this stuff. But the TLDR here is that HTTP routes are not the right thing to be looking at for generating certs. Gateway listeners are the right thing to be looking at for generating certs. I told you it was a big comment. And the fact that HTTP routes have one thing that we haven't done a good job of clarifying. The fact that HTTP routes have host names is only about filtering what listeners that they can attach to, right? Like, and how they will capture traffic for those listeners. It's not really about using them for TLS generation. Is like holding it a bit wrong. And so, but that's on us for not making that clearer in the documentation. So Sendor, who's one of the external DNS maintainers, had a very similar question. I've got a to-do to take this response and basically put it on a similar issue in external DNS to make sure to explain to people what is going on there. But then probably this explanation or an edited version thereof needs to end up on the users or maybe the implementers guide, or we got 3 guides currently. It needs to end up on the one that is for consumers of the API who are not necessarily users. Users and other consumers of the API, to sort of explain why the TLS config lives there and how you should use it, which we have not done a great. And the TLDR here is that use case is handled by listener set. That is one of the reasons that we are introducing listener set, is to handle this specific use case, where you want to be able to dynamically program TLS certificates and provision them, and you want to be able to give that permission to people who can't edit gateways. And so that's one of the reasons that we have listener set as a separate object, because then it can do separate RBAC, which means you can, in theory, delegate the ability for application developers to add listeners, including TLS config, to them if that's what you want to do. But if you don't want to do that, then you just don't give anybody permission to create listener sets, and you have to use the gateway the way you currently do. So that's the idea there, is you cluster administrators and infrastructure administrators can optionally choose to install the listener set API at the end of the day, or screen it off by RBAC once it moves to stable, and that will sort of enable or disable this kind of use case depending on what you as Ian or Chihiro want to do. Does that make sense?
So one thing, I may have misunderstood the request, but it seems like one of the things they're looking for here, or maybe this was just from my conversation, was if you don't have a host name specified on the gateway and you attach HTTP routes with host names, then you would want to generate your cert based on the host names in HTTP route. Is that fair?
So, I mean, yeah, it's one of the things they want. And I kind of said, like, again, you're kind of holding it wrong. Like the reason why we have designed, so the other thing that they wanted to do is to be able to have multiple, to use the fact that we've got a list of certificate refs there, and to be able to have multiple certificate refs on a single HTTP, on a single listener, which is what you would have to do what you just said. So if you have a single catch-all listener that has a star for host name, and then you have specific host names that want specific TLS key pairs to be generated, you then need to be able to have all of those certificates be present on the in the TLS config of the wildcard listener. To do that, the only way that works is for your implementation to be able to terminate those TLS connections. It has to unwrap all of those certificates and look at the CNs and SANs to determine what host names those certificates use. Right? There's no other way for you to be able to. You can't just attempt terminating a connection with the first one. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, I'll try again. Right? Like, so so you need to have and that kind of, and the reason we haven't wanted to do that is because it violates the Kubernetes config of the object should tell you everything you need to know. You shouldn't need to look at something else. Like, you shouldn't need to go out of band and decode a cert to be able to see that information.
But we already support a list of cert refs on listener, and I don't know how you would do that without.
That's why we don't support a list of cert refs on listener. We have a list of cert refs available, but we only support having a single entry in that list of cert refs.
Yeah.
If you read the spec, only having one entry in that list is call conformance. Everything else is implementation specific.
Yes, okay, that's fair. But I know,
right? So implementations may do that, but it is not in the specification. It's an implementation specific behavior, right? Again, because I didn't want us to force implementations to do that. If they choose to do that, that's on them. That's why there is a list there, right? But like, I don't want the specification to force you to do that. And if we were to support that, then it would be forcing you to do that, right? Is that clear?
Yeah, it is. It does feel like we want a supported feature hanging out there because it feels like, I know this was a long-term feature request.
Again,
now we have no idea who actually supports multiple cert refs. Because I do think, I don't know. But yeah,
I would prefer to see us push forward with listener set and see if that meets most requirements that people have. If people still have requirements after we've got listener set available and people are using it, then let's talk then.
That's fair. But I do think we do have the current state of you can include a list of certificate refs on a listener and your implementation may just not support it and you have no real way of knowing if your implementation supports it is confusing. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe we should ask implementations if they can support multiple references. For example, if I think of Kong, I don't really know off the top of my head, so I should check. And maybe
I'm confident that Cilium doesn't, but I am confident that Envoy Gateway does.
Okay. Maybe we could create some kind of a poll in Slack or GitHub just to raise some data, because I think the data here is everything. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, because the key thing is
I mean, in a lot of ways, that gets back to the supported feature idea, right?
Yeah, it does. But also the key thing here is do we want to add a supported feature for a thing that we also have a way to do with listener set? Right, then we have two ways to do something.
I mean, we already have listener set is a better idea.
Sorry, that's why.
So I personally think that listener set is a better way to do this. For what little that's worth.
I don't disagree, but I would say that what we have is already out there and it has the appearance of working. Whether or not it does is dependent on your implementation. But
I mean, I agree that is not an ideal place to be in, but I don't want us to put too much effort into a thing that is going to be obsoleted by listener set, is I guess another way to say that.
Yeah. Also, I think that we have had this specification for 3 years, 4 years now, and I think the constraint of requiring multiple certificate support, if an implementation cannot do it, is that would suck for the implementation. So it wouldn't be fair, in my opinion. So, yeah.
I mean, assuming that Nick's confidence in Envoy Gateway supporting this is correct, and I believe it is, then that would come down to solely because Envoy Proxy happens to really like cracking open TLS connections and rooting around inside them, which is, and it's an interesting implementation choice on Envoy's part. It's not one that I would actually recommend anybody else go out and do in general, just because I tend not to think that that's a great practice. So it seems a little bit less likely to me that we end up seeing more implementations doing it over time. I don't know. Guess we'll see.
I'm pretty sure Rob knows of at least one implementation that also does this.
Yes.
Well, that
I know
implementation's just wrong then. I mean,
yeah, but yeah, so that's why I put that comment on there. That's basically what it says. I tried to talk about some of these issues in there. So yeah, I think that was my position for as of now is listener set is coming, see what that can do for you. Don't do things based off the HTTP route for now.
it is really interesting to me to talk to people and realize how poorly understood the host name in gateway and route and such like that seem to be.
Mm-hmm.
Where,
Yep.
yeah, that's. I talked to
that's
somebody just recently who tended to be thinking of it, who is expecting the host name to determine the binding address of a listener, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Holy moly! Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, okay, I get it. It makes a certain amount of sense. It's just, I thought we'd done a pretty reasonable job of explaining that that wasn't how it worked.
I mean, I guess
yeah,
that comes down
was
to
kinda
the old saw of no matter how clear you think you have been, that wasn't clear enough. Like,
well, it was also interesting to talk a little bit more and realize that we didn't really have a great way of doing what they wanted to do, but ultimately listener sets would be an answer for them as well. So I wasn't terribly concerned about it. It was just an interesting conversation.
I've made a note there for myself as well, because I've got a number of like implementation, various guide updates to do. I've made a note for myself there. That's another one. Because yeah, I think the key part of that explanation is, the host name is a way to filter what listeners your HTTP route is relevant for.
Right.
Yeah. And to add in extra host name field, like host name header captures, if there are multiple HTTP routes attached to the single listener.
All right. We are done with the agenda. Shane put here a short triage session. We have 7 minutes left.
I don't think it is worth doing.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Maybe next time.
Yeah, I think it would be good to try to prioritize that next time, because we should be doing some triage, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think triage is going to come down to what goes in get scoping a lot of the time.
That's true. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Does anyone else have any other topic you want to talk about? Cool. Thank you, everybody.
Actually, I'll point out that I did put in comments from the auth meeting on the 3rd of April. It would be lovely for people to go and take a look at that and point out places where they think I got it wrong. And I will be looking at both. I will look over my notes from other meetings and see about adding other things into this doc. And Nick, to the extent that you remember things about external gateways and such, then that is probably the best place to start collaborating on that.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Thank you for.
Or, you know, anybody else, not just me and Nick.
Anybody else who was there, but like I think Flynn and
Yeah.
I certainly had the most to say in that meeting. I think so. It's most likely that's what I said. I literally got pings from a couple of other people who were like, "Why were you shouting at all the Gateway API people?"
Where were those? Wait a minute. Which room were those other people in?
And I think they wandered in and out of the maintainer workshop room that we were in.
We kept on scaring everyone away. They poked their head in and be like, "No, I'm good."
Yeah.
So many times people would stick their heads in, see the Gateway API people, and then immediately close the door and leave, to the point that we
Yes.
started, you know, asking about it. But there was a point in one of the meetings where we ended up in a somewhat heated discussion about what it meant for a client to be meshed or not. And there was a lot of, you could summarize a lot of that as, you know, one particular person having everybody tell him, "You keep using those words. We don't think they mean what you think they mean." And it was challenging.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. See you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
See you next time.
Thanks everyone. Nice to be on this
Thank you.
timeline for a change. Cheers.
Yeah,
Bye.
it's nice.
Cheers.